My name is Ed Hannenberg. No, that's not even. If you haven't heard by now, my name is Ed Hannenberg. And I am the chair of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here at John Carroll, and it's a delight to welcome you this evening for what is the first public event of a new initiative at John Carroll, a needed initiative considering all that's going on in the world these days. And that's the establishment of the Tuohy Center for Interreligious Understanding. And I'd like to just share a little bit about that and then introduce our speaker and move on to why you're here to hear about Zen and the spiritual exercises. Almost 60 years ago, in the sort of ecumenical spring that followed the Second Vatican Council, a generous gift on behalf of Walter and Mary Tuohy established the first endowed chair at John Carroll University and the first chair of interreligious studies at a Jesuit university in the United States. And over the years, the Tuohy chair has supported a variety of programs, providing both John Carroll students and the greater Cleveland community opportunities for thoughtful discussions of religious life and practice. Along the way, these discussions help to establish 3 endowed chairs within the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, chairs that represent the 3 great monotheistic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Sayed Nursi Chair in Islamic Studies, currently held by Dr. Zeki Sertoprak, was established in 2003. The Jack and Mary Jane Breen Chair in Catholic Theology, which I hold, was established in 2011. And the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Chair in Jewish Studies, held by Dr. Noah Bickert, was established just last year, in 2022. And with the establishment of the Mandel Chair last year, we decided it was time to reimagine the Tuohy Endowment so as to better leverage the resources and expertise at the university and position John Carroll as a hub for interreligious engagement in the region. While we're just beginning, our hope is that the center will be a space for all, will be a space for listening and learning, for conversation and mutual understanding. The German theologian Hans Kung famously said that there will be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. And there will be no peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. So in that spirit of dialogue, I introduce our speaker tonight, who will draw us into a dialogue between 2 different religious worlds, Zen Buddhism and the spiritual vision of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Dr. Ruben Habito is professor of world religions and spirituality and director of spiritual formation at Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Habito served as a Jesuit in Japan for nearly 20 years and taught philosophy and theology at the Jesuit-administered Sophia University in Tokyo from 1976 to 1989. He received spiritual training under Ko-un Yamada Roshi in Kamakura, Japan, who authorized him as a Zen teacher in 1988. He's the author of numerous books and articles in English and Japanese, including Be Still and Know, Zen and the Bible, Zen and the Spiritual Exercises. These 2 books are both on sale at the John Carroll bookstore, which will be open after the talk if you're interested, and maybe we could even convince Dr. Habito to sign a book for you. Many other titles along with these. Dr. Habito is guiding teacher at the Maria Cannon Zen Center in Dallas, a small and diverse Zen practice community with participants from a variety of different religious traditions and worldviews. He's the spouse of Dr. Maria Reese Habito, and together they are blessed with 2 adult sons, Florian and Benjamin. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ruben Habito for Zen and the Spiritual Exercises.
It's a great joy and honor for me to be invited to deliver this first inaugural lecture of the newly reconstituted Tuohy Center for Interreligious Understanding. And I am truly glad to be able to share some of the things that I have learned along the way in the course of my journey in life, and with the hope that you might be able to take some of those things that I have been given as a gift to be your own gift and take it from here. So I'd like to note that from the start, this is not just going to be a lecture that you will say, okay, I agree or I don't agree and so on, and then you go home. But there will be what in Japan they call a small obento. Obento is a lunchbox that you can open at your own time and then partake at your own time. So toward the end, in the last 10 or 15 minutes, I'd like to offer some concrete guidelines for spiritual practice that are derived from both the Zen tradition and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which will be my main topic. But I would like to begin my reflections on interreligious understanding, which is the larger umbrella of tonight's event, with the note that I often say in my classes. I teach at a Methodist seminary in Dallas, Perkins School of Theology, and the persons that I teach are usually student pastors preparing for Christian ministry, either in some local congregation of mostly Methodist, but also Episcopalian, Presbyterian, and so on. And some Catholics come not for ordination to the priesthood, but for chaplaincy and so on, lay persons who would like to engage in that kind of ministry. And so, and the course that I give is a required one for the Master of Divinity called Interfaith Studies, Comparative Theology and Christian Ministry. But they would just call it Interfaith. Oh, have you taken Interfaith yet? Because it's a required course for all of those who need to graduate with their Master of Divinity degree. In any case, I begin that course with a panorama of the world situation. And we look at the stark woundedness of our world. So in the first 2 or 3 sessions, we look at different statistics about how the world is really in pain in so many ways. The inequality. So many who are not even given the basic elements needed to live a decent human life, while a small few are living in a luxurious state that somehow do not seem to be mindful of the rest. Now, that's a generalization, but at least the inequality is a very stark reality of our world today, given so many who are dying of hunger. Every day there are, according to statistics, how many thousand? In any case, we calculated it by the minute. Every minute, there are 19 children under the age of 5 who die of some malnutrition and hunger and related causes, which could have been prevented if they had enough resources and so on. And then as opposed to the world's resources being under the control of a handful of multi-billionaires. And so that kind of imbalance is one of the rampant facts of our situation. Secondly, the world is scarred with a lot of violence, and the recent events in Israeli-Palestine, which are still ongoing, really are a painful reminder to us that we are living in a world of violence where humans are pitted against other humans, groups against groups, and so on. And so there's a lot of animosity between groups and between individuals, and that's the reality of our current world situation. And thirdly, our whole Earth community is facing a major crisis of ecological destruction, which may not assure us of our survival as a species in the next 20, 30 years. And so those 3 major symptoms of our global woundedness are right before us. And in that regard, well, then we go into an analysis of the causes of that. So I won't go into a detailed analysis, but I just wanted, in that regard, that's where I mentioned that if we look at these, maybe we can notice that religion has a role in not so much alleviating, but rather aggravating these aspects of our world's woundedness. I won't go into details about that, but just a general point. I was in India 2-3 decades ago, traveling, just trying to learn about the way people live there and how they saw the world. So I was speaking with a retired army officer at some coffee shop, and I told him that having been there a couple of weeks, I stayed there a whole month, I asked him, well, there is this very blatant inequality. I see palatial houses with jade-studded decorations on their walls and so on, whereas on the streets I see people even starving and dying. What are people thinking about the situation? What do you think can be done about the situation? I asked very innocently. And the retired officer told me, well, they are poor because of their karma, because of some things they may have done in the past, or maybe their previous rebirths, there were some things that they had done in the past that led them to be born in that state. So if they just continue and they do their best, then it'll be okay. So you don't have to worry about them. They're there because of causes, and they can get themselves out of that if they strive to do good, and then in the next life they will be reborn in a rich family or something to that effect. So that gave me the impression that his religion, which was of course the Hindu tradition, was what was instilling in him this view of others as, well, karmic, recipients of previous karma that we cannot help. So we just accept it, and we cannot help one another because that would interfere with the karmic flow events, and so on. So that's just one example of how I felt. If he didn't see that way, maybe he would really just be moved to a sense of compassion, that at least he would share some of his resources with some of his neighbors. But he didn't feel the need for that because he thought it's all going to work out because that's the way karma works. That's just one case in which religion is an aggravating factor. The other case, of course, would be the violence that we see in the name of religion. God is on our side, whichever side that may be. And if each of the actors in that kind of violent conflict say that God is on their side, where is God really? And from our Christian understanding, we can see that God is mourning with all of us in this. If we looked at God as a loving father or mother of us all, looking at God's own children fighting with one another, that would really make a parent be truly sad and very grieved. But still, it is our way of looking at that God. It is our God, God is on our side, that somehow leads us to that kind of attitude vis-a-vis others. And so that's why religion, in that case, can be a factor for aggravating the violence, unfortunately. And thirdly, the ecological destruction. I hear some who are very religious people saying that, oh, the earth is just a station, just a phase, and our true home is in heaven anyway, so why bother about the earth? We're going to leave it anyway and have our home in heaven. So that makes them impervious to or callous or numb against the ecological disaster that is happening in our world. Those are just some sundry examples. And so with that in the background, I invite the class who are supposed to take, who are there because they want to learn about other religions, to see, I invite them to see how, to ask the question, can religion, rather than being a factor that aggravates these symptoms and that lead to our graver woundedness, be a healing factor? How can religion become a healing factor rather than be an aggravating factor? And so that's where the need for conversation among religious traditions comes about. What can we learn from one another about how one another is doing towards healing these very big wounds of our earth, the inequality between those who have and the large number of those who don't even have the basic needs for a decent human life, or to ameliorate or to alleviate and to cool down the violence and animosity among different peoples, or to enable people, religious people, to see that this earth is a place where we have to, or we are called to exercise our religious faith and our religious conviction so that we can be part of the healing of the earth together, rather than seeing that it's just a stage and so we're actually going to be able to escape it because of our religious belief. So those are some of the things that I offer to the class. So those are some things that I'd like to also put in the background as I present my theme, Zen and the Spiritual Exercises. First of all, the word spiritual is at the center of this. Earlier, I was just having a conversation with our colleagues of the Religious Studies Theology Department about the word spiritual. And so there is a series of books published by Crossroad Publications with the general title of World Spirituality. And there are different titles based on the different traditions. There are about 20-something volumes, including Jewish spirituality, I think there are 2 volumes, Islamic spirituality, 2 volumes, Christian spirituality, 2, and then Hindu, Buddhist, and so on, Native American, Mesoamerican, even secular spirituality, and so on. So all these different spiritualities are represented in this 22-volume series. And the editors, before they began the series, met together and asked themselves, how can we take the word spiritual or spirituality in a way that these different traditions can at least resonate with them and not feel that, oh, that's not my understanding. So they came up with this working definition of spirituality, which I'd like to also invite everyone to consider. The spiritual is the innermost core of the human being that opens us to the transcendent, to the holy in our lives, and at the same time to open us to that dimension where we see our interconnectedness with one another. So in short, the spiritual is not a dimension that is separate from the physical. So we do our physical, like we do our physical exercises and on, and then we do spiritual exercises on a separate plane. Not that kind of dualistic perspective, but a way in which we can see spiritual as undercutting our very existence as a human being, and which unites us with the larger whole, that which makes us who we are, namely everything and everyone else, and that which is beyond that. So in that regard, we can find a common strand that the different religious traditions can take and say, yes, I'd like to pursue a spiritual life. And what is that kind of life? It's a life that is always attuned to the center, to the core, the innermost core of our being, and to be able to derive our vision for living, our energy for doing things we're called to do, and the support that we need when we are in dire straits to be able to continue living life with joy and gratitude and peace. So that's what I would understand by the term spiritual. So we are all human beings invited to tap into that spiritual realm from whatever tradition that we may be coming from or we may be living. And as we enter into that place, we can perhaps be able to talk to one another and relate to one another and be able to embrace one another beyond the conceptual, theological differences that we may be able to argue about sometimes, but at least we know that deep within there's something that connects us and unites us and makes us at least on the same side and not separate one another in a kind of a tribalistic way that leads to further animosity. So to be spiritual is to be in touch with, to have access to that innermost core of our very being, of who we are, that enables us to live a life that is truly thriving with joy and peace and gratitude. Now, how can we get there? So there are two paths that I have learned in my life. I was drawn to become a Jesuit early in my life, in my late teens, and I won't go into the details of that, but as soon as after entering the novitiate, we were prepared for the big event, namely we would call it the long retreat. This is the retreat that was designed by Saint Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century, when he himself had a big transformation in his life. I'll talk more about that. But in any case, this long retreat is precisely the way of going from a life of self-centeredness towards a life that is now centered on divine love, so that everything that one thinks, says, and does is no longer based on what can I get out of it, or what will it do for me, but simply, is this in accordance with divine love? And so that is a transformation of the perspective in one's life. So the founder of the exercises, or the one who fashioned the exercises first, is a man named Ignatius of Loyola. He used to be called Inigo, and then he was inspired to change his name at some point. So Ignatius was a young man who was in the military service of a duke in Spain. And he was very ambitious and very vain, and he loved being at court and charm all the ladies there and so on. So his ambition was to go high in the ranks of court and really become a noble person himself. But then something happened. In one of the battles, a cannonball hit one of his legs, so the leg became dysfunctional, so he had to lay in a hospital bed for several months. So during that time, he was so bored, didn't know what to do, so he asked for books. He loved reading these medieval romances about knights and ladies and adventures and exploits and so on. But the person who was attending to him said, I can't find any of those, but here are the two books I have. Here is A Life of Christ, and here another book of a collection of lives of saints. So that's all that he had for reading. So to while away his time, he began reading those books. And little by little, as he read those books and as the content of those books really got to him, he felt, this is really something that feels so inspiring. Maybe this is something I can be also. So then he again dreamt of himself trying to be an admired person in the court, rising in the ranks of royalty and so on. And when he did that, when he imagined himself in that direction, he felt a sense of inner emptiness. That doesn't sound too exciting anymore, after all, compared to what he was feeling when he read the lives of saints and he read about how they sacrificed so much to be able to do things for the glory of God and to be able to help others and so on. So that really burned his heart. So over the course of several months, continuing his reading, and then with the time to just sit there and meditate in silence, somehow a gradual change came upon him, so that now he no longer felt the attraction of going in the world, in the way of worldly glory, but now he wanted to really give himself in the service of others in the way that the saints did. So anyway, that is the origin of the spiritual exercises. And he was mapping down those phases that happened in himself to be able to help others in the same path that he traversed. So he described for himself what he had felt during that time when he was still struggling with all of these doubts and all of these attachments that he still had, and then the gradual alleviation of that to the inspiration that he received when he read the life of Jesus, And then the challenge he received when he saw that Jesus was killed for what he was trying to do. He was giving himself and was willing to offer his life in the service of others. And so that really inspired him to no end. And then after that, he also saw that that way of sacrificing oneself, even to death, is precisely what can give you that eternal glory and joy that knows no bounds. So with that process, which he began to map out, he described procedures for those who would want to follow him in that path. And so that came to be the little booklet that Jesuits now continue to use for their own spiritual transformation and growth. And that's the kind of program that was given to me when I was a young Jesuit. Just learning, first of all, how to look at myself, so to look at my own worldly attachments and to see that they are really something that are not worth pursuing, but yet the struggle remains. So there is a stage of purification from one's attachments and those things that detract one from the path of going, from the path of service and love. And then after the stage of purification, there's the stage of illumination, where we look for examples of individuals who have lived lives that we can emulate and see, that's the kind of life we would like to live. And so the first example that comes there is, of course, the life of Jesus, who showed by word and example of how to live a life that is loving, serving, giving, and self-sacrificing. So with that, with Jesus as a model, the Jesuit is invited to be a companion of Jesus. That's where the name Compañero de Jesús comes from. It was in Spanish, so he named the group. So there was a small group of 5 men who followed him in doing those exercises, and they were also all fired up. And some of them became well-known as missionaries and as religious leaders of their time, including Francis Xavier and so on. So with that, more and more young men came and followed them. So with that came a program that was developed for all of those who wished to follow them in the service of God, in the service of the world. So the spiritual exercises stands as a handbook to help others, to help everyone who is seeking to be transformed from a life centered on self-oriented motivations to a life centered on divine love and motivated to serve others and to serve the world. And so with that, let me just mention that at the culmination of the exercises, so these exercises are divided into so-called 4 weeks. The weeks are not exactly 7 days, but they are phases of a person's undergoing a process of internal transformation. Beginning with a person who is normal, namely one who is thinking of things from the standpoint of oneself, where the center of the universe is I, me, mine, but yet somehow inspired and fired to become something else, like seeing a model. I myself, when I was in my first year of university studies, was also kind of asking questions about how I could live my life. And there happened to be some Jesuits. I was in a state university, very secular and not favorable to religious expressions at all. But there was an enclave of the so-called Student Catholic Action, where there was a chapel, and around this chapel was the rectory, and that's where many of the Catholic students would hang out and get to know one another. We would sing, have lunch together, and then we would just joke and so on. So I enjoyed that company. But at the heart of that was the worship that was offered there. And occasionally there will be a Jesuit who would come from the neighboring university campus, the Ateneo de Manila university campus, to offer a sermon or to talk to or be with the Student Catholic Action students. And so with that, I asked one of them, So, what makes you tick? Tell us. You seem to be living a life that is totally giving towards others. So, please. So, in short, I heard the answer. Why don't you join us? And so, somehow it was a sudden thing. And then all of a sudden came to him, why not? And so, it was at the end of my first year of college. So, now I had finished my credits for 1 year. And rather than going into the next phase for the second year, at that point, then I was led to apply to the Jesuits, and that's where I was accepted. And after that, then I went to the novitiate and studied with the Jesuits from then on, trying to learn how to live like a Jesuit. Since I have left the Jesuits 25 years after that, but it's my Jesuit life and way of living that still continues to be with me and continues to inspire me. And so, in the middle of that, I would like to share with you also that, well, from the Philippines, where I was born and raised, where I entered the Jesuits, about 6 years after having entered the Jesuits, after having undergone the spiritual exercises and now raring to go, studying philosophy, and then afterwards I would study theology and then ready for ordination. Somehow there came about an inspiration to go to Japan, because at that time I had heard that Japan was now an economically booming country, and yet because of that economic rush, it was losing its spiritual roots. And so I was told by some of the missionaries who were there, now is the time for us to really present the gospel in a way that may be attractive to the Japanese, because they are the materialistic trend, the consumeristic trend is very strong, but more and more people are doubting that. So now it's time for us to really offer what the Christian faith can offer. So I felt the encouragement of that. So somehow I found myself being assigned to Japan in my early 20s, after about 6 years in the Jesuits. So I was still in the process of my studies. So I was studying language for 2 years, studying the Japanese language, so I could function in that society and prepare for graduate school. And that happened to be in a place called Kamakura, Japan. It's a very classic place next to Kyoto. It is the city with the most number of Buddhist temples. And so my Jesuit spiritual director at that time, Father Thomas Hand of happy memory, was already going to a local Zen center to practice Zen meditation. It was again the same era, the same spring of Catholic thought that inspired the Tuohys perhaps to fund this center, namely the time when Catholics sought to reach out to other religions and meet people of other faiths and learn from them. And so my spiritual director was in the forefront of that. And so he invited me, why don't you join me? So naturally, out of curiosity and out of the encouragement telling me that to really be able to learn Japanese culture, it's important to be able to participate in their spiritual practices. And so Zen was a very direct one. So I found myself naturally joining in Zen meditation at the Zen temple. So after some preliminaries, I was introduced to the Zen master, whom Professor Hannenberg mentioned, Yamada Koun, or Koun Yamada Roshi. Roshi is simply old teacher, but it's a Japanese term that is used as a term, an honorific term for somebody who is authorized to teach Zen to others. So Yamada Roshi, in my formal introduction to him, asked me, why do you wish to practice Zen? And my answer was, I want to learn about being a spiritual person from the Zen perspective, or from Zen practice. I want to cultivate my spiritual life. A very simple answer. Okay, then, here's your instruction. Sit in a way that is conducive to stillness. Breathe with attention and let your mind come home to the here and now. That's it. 3 points. Find a posture conducive to stillness, specifically sitting. You may also do that standing or walking or doing other things, but sitting is the most direct way of finding that inner stillness. So sit in Zen, that would be Zazen, with a mind paying attention to the breath and then allowing that mind to rest in the here and now. And he said, an added one, our school uses what is known as koans to deepen our practice. And so for your koan, I'm giving you this koan called Mu for your practice. There's a lot written about Mu, so if you're interested, you can read all about it. But rather than giving you more of the background, it simply consists in breathing in, and as we breathe out with a silent sound of Mu as the focus of attention of the mind. Because if you just keep breathing in and breathing out, trying to put the mind into the here and now, it's easy to get distracted all over the place. Oh, what's for dinner tonight? Or when shall I have time to do my assignment tomorrow, and so on. So that kind of very restless mind, which is called monkey mind in Asian meditation schools, is invited to just focus on one thing, and that is simply the lexically meaningless sound of Mu. Literally in Chinese it means nothing. It means the nada of St. John of the Cross. But setting aside that meaning, just take that as a meaningless word, but then as a sound that draws you in and allows you to let your mind be focused on that and just go deeper and deeper into that. So I dutifully did that, and somehow a few weeks after that, something came to me that made me jump with a new discovery. I cannot describe all of the things related to that, but somehow something opened up as I was practicing Mu. And then all of a sudden, to tell you a secret, everything was Mu. The trees, the sky, the mountains, the people, the whole shebang. It's just Mu. Now, what does that mean? Conceptually, you may hear about it in this way, but somehow, for someone who experiences that, that can be a cataclysmic change from the I-centered person to a Mu-centered person. So what does it mean to live as a Mu-centered person? That's what I'd like to explain a little more with the time I have. But so now, going to these two schools of spiritual practice, the spiritual exercises which I had been schooled in for many years up to that time, and which I continue to do. And then Zen, which simply is an invitation to sit and be still and be aware and let the mind be at rest. Where do those two practices converge? In my own humble case, somehow something happened. That's something that happened at that time, a few months after I had initiated the practice of formal Zen, became a kind of a beacon that shed a light through the rest of my life, and it still does up to now. Now, how can I articulate that in words? I was having a conversation with a friend about a year ago who knew that I was in this practice of doing nothing for a short time and just facing a wall or just sitting still. And she asked me, so what's with it? What happens when you sit still in Zen meditation? What is it for you? So without thinking, the spontaneous answer that came out was, it's simply basking in love. What does it mean for you to sit in Zen meditation? Sitting still, breathing with awareness, and just letting the mind come home to the here and now. That's the expression that I would like to share with you. Basking in love. And sometime later, I felt I need to add basking in unconditional love or basking in divine love. It's not the romantic love that we find in romantic novels and so on, but it's that unconditional love that embraces me and embraces all beings, that allows me to also look at all beings as my kin, as also embraced in that same love. So that's what I learned from my Zen practice, and that's what keeps me going. So, and reflecting on that, that's also what I learned from the spiritual exercises. I was saying earlier that the spiritual exercises is like a climb up on a high mountain through a lot of bushes and thickets and bramble bush and thorns and so on. That's through the process of purification of one's attachments, of one's proclivities that lead away from a healthy lifestyle and from a spiritual lifestyle. And once one gets a hold of that and aligns oneself more and goes the straight path up to union with God in Ignatian terms, the next stage would be to look at models in living that life. And again, so we look at the life of Jesus or we look at the lives of saints as actual human examples of living that kind of life. So that's the stage of illumination. And then after that, seeing models like that, then we are inspired to a way where everything comes together and we are now able to enter the so-called stage of union, where we see everything in the light of God's love, uniting us all, calling us all to be brothers and sisters and kin with one another, and living accordingly. So that's the fourth stage, which is based on the death to the self, which Jesus underwent when he died on the cross, and now he lives the risen life in the so-called fourth week of the exercises. For those of you who are not familiar with these terms, I apologize, but if you just Google spiritual exercises of Ignatius, you'll get all of these technicalities. But I just wanted to note that it does involve a lot of stages, and for different people, it can have different time frames. And you don't have to go out 30 days in a silent retreat to be able to partake of the exercises. There is a method of spiritual exercises known as the 19th annotations. And its 19th annotations refers to the notes that Ignatius wrote in his little booklet saying, among the notes, number 19, someone who is so busy with their work and who cannot leave their families and so on, can undertake these exercises not by leaving all of that, but by continuing within their work, within their family life, regularly visiting with a spiritual director once a week, getting the points and doing the meditation in one's own schedule. And so one can do that over a period of from 9 to 16 months. And one can undergo all of the phases prescribed for the spiritual exercises. I have met individuals who have done that, and they tell me how it has made a big difference in the way they live their lives. I can give some examples, but I'll abbreviate all of that. But if anyone is interested, if you read a little about the spiritual exercises and you feel, maybe I can try this also, it should be available. This is a Jesuit university. Ask any Jesuit and they could point out whatever. And there's Father Jim Bretsky over there if you would like to get hold of a Jesuit. So they could point you in the direction of being able to undertake this. You can begin with a short 3-day weekend retreat, which many people do, or an 8-day retreat, a little more serious, under the direction of a Jesuit, or with a group that does that together, or go the full scale with the 19th annotation. Or if you happen to be just recently retired and you have a whole month that you can take, that might be a good way to spend the first time of your retirement so you can see more clearly what to do with the rest of your life, what to do with your one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver suggests. And so for me, I had the fortune of receiving guidance in the spiritual exercises when I was in my late teens. And since I had done it 3 times, the full month, and every year as a Jesuit, he would be scheduled to undertake it 8 days a year taking off from work and taking off from everything, go to a nice retreat house with all of the amenities, and just basking in what the spiritual exercises have to offer. But that's the way of ascending to the top of the mountain, by going through those stages up. Now, what is that? What is Zen then in comparison to that? What came to me was that Zen is like being taken by a helicopter and being put on top of that mountain and being able to see the sights without having gone through the stages. But that does not mean that you now can ignore all of the other things. It's simply not going through the methods that Ignatius prescribed, of going through examining your sins and attachments and trying to get rid of them, and then going through those phases of detaching yourself and then making resolve, and then finding examples in the life of Jesus and the life of saints, and then resolving with the images that the exercises provides. There's a lot of visualization, by the way, in the exercises, and that helps in deepening that experience of oneness. So rather than going through all of that, the Zen way is simply you could call it the apophatic way, the non-discursive and non-visualizing kind of way, where you just sit, be still, open your heart, and let it be touched by that unconditional love. And so that's how I feel that Zen can invite people to that same experience that Ignatius underwent when, in the summit of the exercises, he describes, now having gone through all of that, the fruit of the exercises is now to see divine love in everything. That's why a Jesuit motto is also finding God in all things. And not just finding in terms of searching for, but finding, discovering, realizing that God is in all things. And in realizing that God is in all things, we realize that love is in all things. And so we become bathed and soaked in that love, and we are so inspired and empowered to then just live our lives empowered by that love toward others and toward healing the world. That is what I would describe as the fruit of the spiritual exercises. But now in Zen, simply sitting, breathing in, breathing out, and allowing our hearts to be touched in that silence, we come to an awareness precisely of our deep interconnectedness with each one and each thing in this universe. And in so doing, and in experiencing that, we see each and every one as intimate kin to all of us. There is no other. Each and every one of us belongs to one another. That's an expression that can come from that experience of sitting still. And that is precisely another way of describing what Ignatian contemplation on divine love is all about. So in that regard, these two traditions somehow, with all their differences in left brain, right brain, discursive, non-discursive, or going up a mountain, or just sitting there on top of the mountain itself, all of those differences are valid because they're different approaches. But when you reach the top, you can describe a scenery, a panorama that both would recognize in one another. So I believe it was the Dalai Lama who said that you don't have to become a Buddhist to really attain the fullness of yourself. If you have a religion, if you belong to a religion, if you're Christian, go thorough in being Christian. If you're Jewish, be thorough in your being Jewish. If you're Muslim, be thorough in being Muslim. Buddhist, Hindu, and so on, be thorough in your religion. And if you really go down to the depths of what that religion is teaching you, then you will be able to talk to one another, and you will see that at the heart of all religions, according to the Dalai Lama, is love. Somehow religious scholars would say, that's an overgeneralization. But somehow I think he touches something very important there, in that if we really are truly religious in the sense of what our tradition tells us, we will reach that point where, as Paul says in one of his epistles, Galatians, it is no longer I that live, but Christ in me. And if it is Christ who lives in me, it is Christ crucified on the cross, crucified with all the people who are suffering in violence, crucified with the people in Gaza, on both sides, crucified with the people in Ukraine and in Russia, crucified with the people in Ethiopia or Yemen and all of those places that are warring, crucified with all of those children who are dying of hunger, and asking, my God, why have you forsaken me? To take on that cry of Jesus on the cross as our own cry with the world can be perhaps the gateway to the resurrection. How is that? That's the koan I'd like to leave. But as I promised, I'd like to offer just a few guidelines for a lunch pack that you can take. If you found anything of interest in what I just said, if not, then just dismiss it and just go your way. But if you feel that there's something that might be in it for you or for your life that might enrich it or might challenge it, then my suggestion is what I also tell those who happen to be in my class. Your assignment, should you decide to accept it, is to take 5 minutes of your 24-hour day and do nothing. By do nothing, I don't mean to slacken off and just kind of goof around, but intentionally don't just do something, sit there. Sit there in a posture conducive to stillness, breathe with attention, and just let your mind and heart come to the here and now. Just be open to the sounds around you, the sights that you see. Well, don't look around, but just let your eyes be slightly opened, and you may face a garden, you may face a wall, you may face a living room, you may face whatever, but don't look at them in a way that would let your mind go out, but just allow that to be the scenario of the here and now that you are taking, and just give yourself 5 minutes every day doing nothing in that very systematic way. And if you will, keep a journal. The things that come to you during that period may be important or not, but just jot down whatever happens that you think is significant, and just keep that journal as you go along. And if you're faithful to those 5 minutes, you may feel, I think I want to do 10 minutes, or maybe 20 minutes, or maybe join a day's retreat somewhere in a Jesuit retreat house, or maybe in a Zen center near the area, or maybe in a day of prayer at the synagogue or at the mosque and so on. And find yourself in a time of silence, just entering into that innermost core of your own being that allows us to open up to the transcendent. And who knows, something might happen that might just change our life forever. Thank you.